waste of time and a waste of your energy. So what we're everything that because we've already established the law of conveyance that a deed poll, anybody that signs a deed poll is stopped from disputing it. So as long as you understand the law for each of the law and equity, because there's two, right? There's the common law and then there's the equity, and that's why it says law and equity. Anything with "and" is a definite line in the sand, and there's more than one. So that line in the sand is actually displayed with two certificates: the birth certificate and the live registration of birth. Right? The live registration of birth, and you don't need any of these things because the government's going to try to say, well, no, you don't have that right because you're in fee simple and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's great. Thank you for saying that's fine. If you think I'm in fee simple, then why didn't you recognize my release? Right? Boom. Now they're screwed because now they're person trafficking and being a slave company. And that's against all laws everywhere. Okay? So now you've dealt with that corporate person by them challenging you and saying that you're subject to their laws. Because by them saying that you're subject to their laws means that you're fee simple, and that means that you have the right to leave. Right? See where I'm going at with this? And then, so now that you've left, right, and you're no longer the corporate person, the law recognizes you in the proper capacity and prefers to put you back to your original right. Right? You see what I'm getting at? So they're also stopped by the live record of birth for the land tenure. That's your remitter. Right? Commentaries upon Littleton talks about the remitter. Right? That's the remitter. That's your remittance. That is your indenture saying that you were born as a live individual and have natural rights of life, liberty, and land. Right? Owned by yourself, not in a group with anyone else. Right? You'll notice this group thing, it's going to come up lots. What is that? The United Nations stuff is all, like, you notice it gets into owning things either separate or together, right? And that's what they're getting at in there, is that they can't force anybody to get into agreements that they don't want to be in. And that's also why law isn't written in stone, because you have the right to change your agreements. Just because you made an agreement today being ignorant doesn't mean you can wake up tomorrow and say, okay, I didn't like that agreement that I made. So what can we do to fix this? How can we change this so I don't injure you, but I'm not forced to stay in this? Right? And that's us getting rid of those things that we agreed to hold in trust, right? That made us that corporate person. You see what I'm getting at? So when we actually understand the rules of nature and how they've manipulated this and wrapped them in equity and all this other kind of, right, rules of jurisdiction for the jurisdiction that you're in, it really changes. And that's really what I'm trying to define to everybody, is all these different jurisdictions and how you move yourself through them, not the court, right? They just recognize it because they can't, because you're not saying, yeah, you win, right? Because we're all saying the wrong things in court and everything else. So once we start speaking Martian, right, in these Martian courtrooms, right, because they're not speaking English, they're speaking legalese, right? So they're speaking Martian, right? And we're trying to use English in that Martian jurisdiction. It doesn't work, right? And then you can look at equity as Martian, and then common law as being the law of Jupiter, right? They're that different. You see what I'm getting at? But Jupiter created the laws of Mars, right? Because it's in its shadow all the time, right? And it controls it by whatever Jupiter does because of its sheer mass and everything else, right? You can look at it in that same form, the way nature applies, right? So it created it. It's gonna manipulate it for how it wants to, right? Until it can break free from it, right? But obviously the solar system's a little bit different. I don't think it'll ever be able to break free from Jupiter, but I think you guys are kind of getting at where I'm getting at by throwing in the laws of nature stuff in there at the same time? Because they are mirrored exactly with the laws of nature. It's only once we agreed.
Wait there. If a good meteor hits that Jupiter, it's fucking over for it, and then the other planet can live its life freely. There's reversion in nature through the meteorite fucking writ.
and
that was my point.
And I think that's exactly why they call it reversion, because you're reverting. You're reverting back to what you should be instead of what you shouldn't be, because we didn't make this agreement to get into it. Our parents did. We just didn't know any better, right? We are indoctrinated. We didn't choose this. We were indoctrinated. Our parents were indoctrinated. Their parents were indoctrinated, right? You see what I'm getting at? What happens, when you're younger and you want something, they tell you, okay, well, you better go and get a fucking job. What the fuck is that? Right? You see what I'm getting at? So now when we realize all these things that have been indoctrinated in equity, right? And this is since equity is all things in English law. Because even common law itself is actually equity, because it's the first level of trust between you and the monarchy, right? So it's all equity, because equity is a trust where you've granted something to somebody else. And anytime that you do that, you are no longer in control of it, and they are the owner of it, right? So that's where everybody really has to understand that the biggest issues is in common law, not really in equity, because to get rid of equity is super simple, right? Sell all those things that need, right, to somebody else that's going to jump up to being the corporate. They're going to jump right up to being the SEDEC-QV, especially if you give a really good deal on it, right? Matter of fact, you'll have people fighting over the stuff, right? Just begging to be corporate citizens. So let them have it, right? And get yourself out. And there you go. You've dealt with equity. It's that simple, right? It's the common law and going after your lands that's the issue, because that's now where you actually have to go to court, right? And even if you did just release the corporate person, actually, I can't even really say that, because once I actually did it properly, because I did it actually in person, I brought it right to the legislative building and everything else, and personally delivered my releases. And then I went to court, to the equitable court, because I didn't have the money to go to Queen's Bench and try to restrict them. And I filed all the same stuff in the provincial court. The trial, I've never seen a trial like this in my entire life. It was a complete kangaroo court. I pretty much did whatever I wanted to, and all that he ever had to do, once he said something, I challenged him, and then he'd just say, okay, proceed, Mr. Brewis. And it seems that, because I got pulled over a couple days after that, because I was moving my domicile, because I was being forced to stay in a different province to deal with this matter, when I already vested my lands in a different province. So I was coming back to the province that I originally investing in, and I had everything that I had. I was driving a truck that was not in my name. It was not insured in my name, because that's important, because it needs to be insured and everything else until you have your own land. So I didn't have control of those assets, those things. And the fee simple that had control of them, they were insured. That fee simple was not driving them. So I was not, they didn't even ask me for a driver's license. He didn't even ask me for my name or anything else, right? Everything was insured. He didn't even ask me about the insurance, but I showed it to him anyway. And he basically said, he was already telling me, you're free to go and everything else. And it was just, it just blew my mind. I've never been in a stop like that. And since then, they they won't pull me over. And they wouldn't